Alrighty, so we are live. Hello everyone and welcome to ProductTank Heidelberg May event. Also, happy Star Wars Day to all the fans that are joining us today. So tonight your hosts are myself, Evelina, and my colleagues Swanand and Anya. A bit about ProductTank for those who are joining us for the first time. This is the world's largest product community. It has been developed by product people for product people, and it basically started in 2010. So far, has spread over 200 cities across the world. You can see them all popping up here. We are very excited actually because on May 26th, ProductTank Heidelberg will celebrate its very first birthday. If you are interested to know that the local communities have to offer or any of the upcoming conferences, you can always visit mindtheproduct.com and learn more. And this is all about the community, so we love to have you involved, and there are multiple ways you can do that. You can speak at Product Tank, you can host or sponsor a Product Tank event, you can write for mindtheproduct.com or become Mind the Product member and get access to even greater content. Tonight, we are honored to host Roman Pichler, and in this Ask Me Anything session, he will be answering questions about collaborative product vision and strategy. So if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat, and we will make sure to address as many as possible. I'm sure Roman doesn't need a lot of introduction, but nevertheless, he's a well-known product management author, coach, expert, and trainer in the field of digital products and agile practices. Roman has more than 15 years of experience teaching product owners, product managers, helping and advising product leaders and helping companies create better product management structures. Over the past 10 years, Roman has also played a leading role in developing new practices that will help agile organizations and teams create successful products. So, Roman, welcome. And we're really excited to have you here with us tonight. Thank you for accepting our invitation, first of all.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and lovely to be with you.
Cool. So we would like to start with maybe a little bit more generic question, but just to set up the scene. So in your mind, or based on your definition, what is the product vision, and how can one make sure that this product vision is inspirational?
Right. Yes. Nice question, and good questions to get us started. Yeah, thank you for asking it. So, I guess most terms in product management are ambiguous to a larger or smaller extent, and product vision certainly is one of those terms where different people really do have different ideas. So I think it makes sense to clarify. And in fact, I've changed my mind over the years, what I think a good definition of a product vision is. So I view a product vision as the ultimate reason for creating a product. And I think an effective product vision describes the positive change the product should bring about. So it's about essentially expressing a purpose for working on the product, for developing the product, for progressing the product, for offering the product. And to make this a little bit more concrete, an example I like to use, if I wanted to offer a product that helps people maybe become aware of their eating habits and maybe improve their food intake, possibly to lose weight or reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes, then the vision of such a product could be healthy eating, or to help people eat healthily. So it should really be a big, grand, ideally inspirational goal. So an inspirational goal would be a goal that creates some pull, that is motivational, that gives people some meaning, a purpose, as I said earlier. And how can we make sure that the vision is inspirational? I think to a certain extent by being aware of who the vision is for. I mean, the vision, usually, at least the way I use it and the way I teach it, is primarily aimed at an internal audience, so development teams and stakeholders. So I think it's important that the vision resonates with those individuals. And what can be helpful is that the vision is fairly concise, fairly short, so people can actually remember it. So I'm personally not a great fan of verbose visions that, I don't know, you kind of need to sit down and really read it very carefully, and then it's hard to express it with your own words. And a good way to come up with a vision that is meaningful for the people involved, the key stakeholders and development team members, as well as the person in charge of the product, is to have a joint visioning workshop. And that also then hopefully increases the chances that the vision is shared, that it's truly a common goal, and acts as like the product's true north, and create some fundamental alignment.
Yeah, I think that yeah, absolutely. And that's a good segue to the next question that we have is who creates the vision? And then after it's created, who owns it?
Right. Yeah, so, I'd say, so first of all, I think it's useful to use a product vision in addition to other, you could say, plans or strategic artifacts, such as a product strategy. You could also argue that it might make sense to capture the product vision and product strategy together, something I like to do. So the person for ensuring that a product vision and product strategy and other product plans exist will be the person in charge of the product. So the product manager or Scrum product owner, or whichever role we want to assign to this person. But I think it's best created, as I said earlier, collaboratively. So I generally find it's a very powerful technique to set goals together with development team members and key stakeholders. There's several good reasons for this. The first one is that this way you leverage people's knowledge and creativity. Now, with the vision, you probably don't necessarily need it, but with strategic product decisions or road mapping decisions, often you have to rely on the expertise of development team members and key stakeholders. So you can leverage people's expertise. You make sure that the vision is clear, and everybody has the same understanding, and that it resonates with people, that people do find it motivational or inspiring. And then finally, if you invite people to set a goal together with you, and you invite people to make a decision with you, they're more likely to support the decision and buy into the decision, rather than the person in charge of the product setting the vision and then going from stakeholder to stakeholder into the various development team members or development teams and trying to kind of sell the vision. So like, this is a really good vision, we should really be using this. So in that sense, I think it's best owned collaboratively. But again, person in charge of the product manager, Scrum product owner, should make sure that there is a vision, and that vision is that people are aware of the vision, and that vision is also stays in people's mind, and people are aware of it. Because there's no point, obviously, I don't think there's a point creating a vision and then not using it. So it should really be something that, as I said earlier, offers some alignment and acts as a big overarching goal that exercises some pull that people move towards.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when you talk about doing it collaboratively, can you talk a little bit more about what all exercises or what process it could follow to do it collaboratively?
That's another great question. So I think, generally, when it comes to product decisions, we've got two choices. We can make them on our own as product people, or we can involve others. And which approach is right will depend on the impact. The more important a decision is, I think the more useful it is to involve others in the decision-making process. And traditionally, the way this is often approached is that the product manager, product owner would have one-on-one conversations with individuals. But I think it can be more powerful to bring people together in a shared workshop, be it on site or be it online. The benefit of that is that people hear each other's ideas and concerns and understand each other's needs. And so the person in charge of the product doesn't have to act as a go-between or as a mediator or as a negotiator or as a broker. So it's then more facilitating that conversation, or possibly having an agile coach or a scrum master or another skilled facilitator present. So I've already started to give some suggestions. First of all, bring people together in form of a workshop, be it online on site, and then involve the right people. So the right people are, first of all, the key stakeholders. And by key stakeholders, I mean those individuals who are not on a development team, but who are needed in order to develop or progress the product. So if a commercial revenue generating product, that would be somebody typically from marketing and sales, maybe somebody from support or operations, maybe somebody from finance. And so, sometimes you find that more people want to be present and you don't necessarily need them. So then, that's a piece of communication you probably need to have, and reassure people that their needs are being taken into account appropriately. Or sometimes people are hesitant to show up, maybe because, they're pressed for time, or maybe because, I don't know, they had some bad collaboration experiences. But then again, I think it's important to talk to the individuals and find out how you can help them attend. So it's really important to think about who you should invite. And then what can be really helpful is, particularly if people aren't used to collaborative decision making, and if the group hasn't maybe worked together, or people haven't worked together much, then to establish some ground rules. And things like we take turns, not like me talking all the time, but those people who haven't said much are encouraged to speak up, and others who like to share, are encouraged to reflect on what they say. Or we offer we try and be kind to each other. We try to be honest and transparent. And then the third thing that I find really helpful is to have a skilled facilitator present. So again, if it's an important decision, so if we're talking about coming up with a shared vision, or maybe coming up with an initial strategy, or making an important strategic decision, maybe to pivot, I think it can be very helpful for the person in charge of the product being able to focus on contributing to the decision. And in that sense, offering leadership and her or his expertise. And not having to facilitate and moderate, and making sure that everybody's heard and nobody dominates, because that's sort of one of the anti-patterns or pitfalls of collaboration, that the most senior person starts to dominate, or the highest paid person opinion wins. So that's the hippo syndrome, or that you kind of try and broker a weak compromise, and you try and agree on the smallest common denominator. And usually that's not helpful either. So it's really about leveraging people's ideas and creativity and expertise, and trying to find the best possible solution, the right solution, and the right goal, the right vision. That attracts as much support, as much buy-in as possible. And so, a skilled facilitator can help, and then can help guide people through a decision-making process, and also help select the right decision-making rule, or decision rule. And for me, that's maybe a super important point. Common decision rules are things like unanimous agreement, which means everybody's truly happy with the decision, everybody's happy with the vision. Consent would mean nobody has any meaningful objections. And then you get voting. Where you say, if 50% or more, or maybe 2/3 agree, then we have a decision. And then another decision rule would be so that would be majority vote, or supermajority. And another decision rule would be a person in charge of the product decides after you've had a discussion. Now, when it comes to the vision setting, because in my mind it is so important and so fundamental, I think it's useful to try and opt for unanimous agreement, so that everybody really feels the vision makes sense, and that's really the right vision, that's the right purpose, that's the right positive change to shoot for. And again, that then maximizes the chances that it's inspirational, that it resonates with people, the goal resonates with people, and that people buy into the vision.
Sure.
So it's important really to kind of think things through, particularly if you haven't got an established practice or culture of collaborative decision making, which many organizations don't.
That's true.
and kind of, you know, particularly in a first session, a first workshop, really kind of think it through, as I said, and plan it out to a certain extent. Think about how's this gonna work out, you know, who's gonna come, and do we have the right people, who will facilitate this, what kind of decision-making process do we use, what decision role do we use, and avoid those mistakes of allowing the most senior person to dominate or brokering a weak compromise. So those are anti-patterns. That's not an effective way to decide together.
Sure. Yeah, and just a little bit extension to that. We all use the vision board that you coined. How can we use that collaboratively? Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, nice to hear that you use the product vision board. So, I mean, the vision board is just a structure to allow people to capture the vision of a product and then key elements of a product strategy underneath. And, you know, you can literally, for a brand new product, you can have an initial visioning / strategizing workshop where you set the vision together and then try and come up with an initial product strategy. And, you know, quite literally do it together. I mean, if you do it online, you could use, you know, I don't know, something like, say, a Trello or Mural or Miro board, or, you know, the various tools like, you know, Lucid comes to mind that offers the product vision board as a ready-made template, and do it together. If you're in the same room, you could just use Post-it notes, for instance, do it on the office wall, you know, if that works for you. But really encourage people to make suggestions, and really encourage people to come forward and say, like, I think that would be a great idea, or maybe we could express it this way. Which also means, and I guess that's part of the process of facilitating such a joint session, and maybe also part of setting ground rules, that people have to be comfortable to speak their mind, and people have to feel safe to make suggestions and not be kind of frowned upon, or, you know, have to be kind of careful and cagey what they say. You know, so, you know, sometimes people talk about trust, sometimes people talk about psychological safety. The two things are closely connected. So it's important that people feel that, you know, it's okay to suggest something. It's maybe also okay to say something that doesn't immediately resonate with everyone. That's cool. That's fine. Yeah. And so one way to then practically, in a way, facilitate this is to use a structured brainstorming technique. And I mentioned Post-it notes earlier. Allow people to write Post-it notes. If you use something like Trello, you know, ask people to write Trello cards. And so that, you know, people first have an opportunity to hear and see what everybody thinks. And then you can start exploring why that is. And you can think about, okay, can we now select some of those cards? Can we combine some of those ideas into new ones? And this is where the real work starts, and hopefully where the fun begins.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
So I would be interested, we have touched now a couple of times on strategy. I would be interested, when you now have a vision and you have everybody rallied and everybody is now hyped to do it, how do you now transfer this momentum to an initial product strategy and then on to a full-blown product strategy?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Anya, for asking it. So for me, a product strategy does two things. It describes the approach chosen to get closer to the vision, or to realize the vision, bring about the vision. And it also describes how we intend to achieve product success. And so there are four elements that I like to capture in a product strategy. The first one is the value proposition, or the needs, or the main problem that the product should address, or the primary benefit it should offer. So, for instance, it could be reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So that might be a sample needs statement. And then the next thing will be the target group, the audience, the beneficiaries, the users and customers. And it might be middle-aged men like myself, for instance, who maybe have developed unhealthy eating or possibly drinking habits, you know, over their lifetime. You know, that might be a target group. So, you know, where we think about, is there a specific market segment, or, you know, a group of people who would benefit from having that problem addressed. You know, who might that be? Who might be suitable beneficiaries? And then the product itself, with its standout features that set the product apart from competing existing offerings. So that might be something like personalized recommendations using latest AI technology. What else can I think of? Seamless integration with leading smart scales and smartwatches, for instance. So those are at least two standout features, maybe. And then as a fourth element, the business goals, so the desired business benefits. That might be to generate revenue. That might be to help diversify the business. That might be to develop the brand. It might be to acquire a technological advantage or knowledge, possibly a combination thereof. And to a certain extent, that'll depend on where the product is in its life cycle. So, for a brand new product, a profit target wouldn't make any sense, because usually revenue generating products don't become profitable until they've reached a product market fit and entered the growth stage. So that's the initial product strategy. Those are the strategy elements. And how do you get to the initial strategy? Well, partly by asking yourselves what would be a feasible approach for us to realize the vision, but then also by having at least some understanding of the domain, the markets. So if you're in a position that you want to enter a new market, a market that you haven't addressed, then it'll be very hard just to schedule an effective visioning, strategizing session, come up with a solid, inspiring initial vision, and a good enough testable initial strategy. I think that's hard. You probably then need to do some initial product discovery work, where you maybe carry out market and user research, where you maybe interview, talk to selected users, customers, you observe them, carry out direct observation, you do some competitive research and analysis, and get a feel for what's happening in that market space. What are some important trends, both in terms of consumer trends, but also technology trends. Possibly it's a regulatory, possibly it's a regulated market, and that's something to be aware of. And so it very much depends on what kind of product we're talking about, or where the product is in its life cycle, if it's brand new or not, and how much you know about the market, generally speaking, that the product should address, the wider market. So an example that comes to mind, which isn't really from the digital space, but when Toyota, and that example is described in Jeffrey Leiker's book, The Toyota Way, which used to be quite popular a while back. It's still a good book. And so I really like that example, because that's from when Toyota developed the first Lexus, and Toyota's not renowned, to be a company that kind of splashes out money and spoils their employees. And they sent the chief engineer, which is sort of like the product manager responsible for a vehicle, for a car at Toyota, and a few other key people for 6 months to California to live the life. And I think they sort of lived in a nice penthouse type apartment, and got to drive posh cars, luxury cars, and were invited to high society parties. And the idea was really to allow them to carry out market and user research and live the life of their prospective customers, to really understand what's it like, and what's important to those people, and what is it like to drive competitor products, competitor cars. And so they then acquire that knowledge, and some people would say it's a form of ethnographic studies or research. Took that knowledge back to Japan, and I think that helped Toyota create a very successful first Lexus car. So, that goes to show that if you want to address a market where, you have limited knowledge, a market you've never addressed before, but it's an existing market, then you have to invest a little bit of time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 6 months. Maybe a few days or a few weeks is enough. But that if you can't come up with an initial strategy that is testable, where the statements are solid enough that you can find out if a statement is likely to be valid or invalid, likely to be correct or incorrect, then you need to do that initial product discovery work. Yeah. It's sort of kind of a way to bootstrap the strategy, you could say. And an indicator is, or a heuristic is, if your statements are fairly big and fairly a little bit woolly and a little bit coarse-grained. So if you find it kind of hard to narrow down the target group to make it so specific that you can tell if somebody's included or not, you probably lack some knowledge there. Or if your need statement, your problem or benefit statement isn't so specific that ultimately you can test it, you can find out if that problem, as you've described it, really does exist. Again, you probably need to do a little bit of more work, and that work might be just iterating over those statements and refining them. I mean, that's just kind of, how should I put this? That's just part and parcel of any creative work. But if you struggle to do that, if you struggle to refine it, then that's an indication that you lack knowledge and that you should probably stop and do a little bit of upfront discovery work.
Yeah, great. One question related to that, okay, we have an inspirational vision, we have work to create inspirational strategy as well, which we did collaboratively. But sometimes we also see that people who are really passionate about changing something are not in a leadership position. And how can you influence this whole process bottoms up? Do you have any experience in how can we have some discussions bottoms up around strategy?
Yeah, interesting question. So, for me, strategy really is crucial in order to then make the right tactical product decisions and get, in a way, the development and execution piece right. So it's very hard to stock a product backlog effectively, and it's very hard to write effective user stories if you're not clear on who the users are or who the customers are, if you're not clear on the overall value proposition and the key features of the product. I mean, the user stories you'll then end up writing are likely to be highly speculative, and it's questionable that they are a good investment of the time and effort being spent to write them.
Sure.
So, if I'm a development team member, and there is no product strategy, or no product strategy has been communicated to me, or haven't been involved in any product strategy conversations whatsoever, then, I'd go to the person in charge of the product and say, like, hey, can you help me understand this? Can you help me understand who this product is for and why people would want to buy it, and what makes it stand out, and what are the key business benefits? If I was the person in charge of the product, but I'm not in charge of the strategy, and people expect me to take care of the product backlog and be more tactically minded or tactically focused, I'd engage with the person who makes the strategic product decisions. And that might be another product professional. It might be a line manager. And again, have a very similar conversation. Have a conversation around, why we're building this product, who's this building for, how will this product create value, and try and capture and visualize that. And then, in terms of kind of exploring ideas, sometimes that can be part of, some skunk work. Maybe something, you can do as part of, a research or pet project. Some organizations, like historically 3M and Google, have given employees time to do some research work, and then, useful products like Google Mail, for instance, or the Chrome browser emerged out of that work. And I've also seen in other companies, teams just dedicating a little bit of their time here and there to create a first rough prototype, and then use that in order to convince the decision makers that it would be a good idea to consider, developing a product and investing in it. So it kind of depends a little bit on your organizational context, and how much freedom you have, and how much of maybe possibly your time and energy you're willing to invest.
Great. Yeah, and I think like you touched earlier, the communication is also the key. So if people who are not in decision making position are having questions about vision and strategy, that is a reflection of something not working properly when it comes to the communication, as you said. So
that's right. Yeah, and I mean, generally speaking, I would expect that the person in charge of the product manager or Scrum product owner, I mean, we talked earlier about ownership, and I said the vision is best owned collaboratively, and I do think so. And I think, in a way, the strategy is best owned collaboratively as well. But if when push comes to shove, and if no agreement or consensus can be reached in a reasonable time frame, then it should be the person in charge of the product who has the final say and makes the decision. So I really think that, generally speaking, product people should have what I call holistic or full stack ownership. Vision, strategy, and tactics. Really, that's typically speaking something that a product person should be responsible for, and should be authorized to lead and ultimately decide on. So, I think it's not healthy when, say, a line manager makes the strategic decisions for a product, and then a product person is expected to write the user stories and work with the development team to get it built. It's like, that doesn't sound like an empowered product person to me. But, sometimes that's just the way it is. And again, then it's at least valuable to maybe clearly state, what we're aiming for, what's the vision, and what's the strategy, the approach chosen to get us there. And are we confident that we've nailed the target group? Are we confident that we've nailed the needs, and so forth?
Great.
So when you have now an hopefully empowered product person, what in your experience would you think is the best approach to keep communicating with the team so that everybody stays motivated, that people keep being aligned on the vision during the process of the product development?
Yeah, another great question. So for me, the key is to recognize that development team members, or members of a modern development team, should not only be programmers and people who are more or less exclusively solution focused, but really we're talking about a cross-functional development team, and at least representatives. Some of those team members should regularly be involved in product discovery and strategizing work. So a good way to implement this suggestion is to schedule quarterly strategy and roadmap workshops, where you essentially review the current product strategy and roadmap. And that's a good opportunity as well to remind people of the overarching vision, the purpose, why we're doing things, and then check if the vision, not the vision, hopefully the vision will still be valid, if the product strategy is still valid and effective, and if the roadmap is still valid. So you could say, an inspect and adapt cycle on a strategic level, just like in an agile context, you'd have an inspect and adapt cycle on the tactical level, and you'd maybe do that every 2 weeks, depending on the length of your sprints, right? You'd get together, you look at the product increment, and you then collect feedback, and that helps you adapt your product backlog and make the right tactical product decisions. And so you do something similar, I would suggest, on a strategic level, and involve, as I said, the development team members or representatives from the development teams in that session, and the key stakeholders. And that's a great way to bring people together, to allow people to reconnect, build trust, leverage people's expertise, align everyone, create a shared understanding, and secure buy-in, so that people moving towards those shared plans, or execute, so that to maximize the chances that they'll execute those plans, or at least the strategy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely makes sense. One question again on I can say on communication is we are talking about within team, and how we should communicate internally to different stakeholders and to our product team. But there is also some communication outside your organization about your strategy and vision. Can you shed some light on that? That how would you differentiate this communication, and what aspects you have come across with working with different people?
Right. Yes. Nice question. So, it feels like a get out clause, but it really depends on the context. So if your product is part of a more or less cohesive product portfolio, or possibly a product bundle, think of, say, Microsoft Office as a product suite, a group of products that are bundled together. They're all productivity tools. People use at least some of them, the core products, probably interchangeably. Think of PowerPoint, Excel, and Word, for instance. Or if you don't like Microsoft products, that's okay. Think of the Google or the Apple equivalent, or Open Office equivalents. I mean, we're talking about a group of, or a suite of productivity tools here. So if I owned the word processing product, like Word, text processing product like Word, for instance, then I probably need to align with, say, the person who owns PowerPoint and Excel, to make sure there is seamless user experience, and maybe align product roadmaps, align product goals, and be able to move forward together. But I think ideally that should be facilitated by somebody who then owns the product suite or the product portfolio, a product portfolio manager or product portfolio owner or product suite manager or product suite owner, whichever term you prefer. So that's something where ideally, as the individual product manager, product owner, I'd like to get a little bit of support. Somebody who helps identify dependencies between product and harmonizes strategies and roadmaps. I mean, the alternative for when you have closely products that are pretty closely aligned and bundled, as in the case of Microsoft Office, that you consider to have a shared strategy for at least some of those products. That's something to consider. It usually works when the target group is identical and the value proposition is very similar, and also the standout features are very similar. And there's an overlap with the business goals. If particularly target group and value proposition, the needs, if they are distinct or if they differ to a certain extent, then it's probably better to have separate strategies. And then sometimes it makes sense to invite people who look after related products to your sessions, to your workshops, to your strategy sessions, and treat them as key stakeholders. But again, generally, when you are in a situation where your product is part of a portfolio, it would be good to have a product portfolio manager or product portfolio owner who then manages that portfolio and ensures that the portfolio, the group of products as a whole creates as much value as possible. And that might be a dedicated person, or it might be the head of product. So in smaller companies, often the head of product can take on that role.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I think even the language that we use externally to communicate our strategy might be different from what we do internally. So a good example is maybe Tesla. We know stories about how the strategy is communicated internally versus what is in the market as a statement. So how do you balance that?
Well, I look at a product strategy primarily as an internal planning tool. I have to say, how much you really want to then communicate to your customers and users. I don't know. I find that some companies use their product roadmaps as a communication tool in the sense of sharing information about upcoming releases, about and kind of instilling confidence in the marketplace that the company is committed to the product and it's got some great ideas in the pipeline. And so if you do that, then I would I would derive a public roadmap. That'd be my preference from an internal roadmap. So again, when it comes to product roadmaps, I tend to use them primarily as internal planning tools. And then if you want to communicate some product goals, some benefits that you want to offer, some outcomes that you want to offer in the future, if you want to communicate that to the market, then I derive a new roadmap, a new public roadmap from it, and make it more coarse-grained and generalize a little bit more. So, you have more room to wiggle, consider removing dates or timeframes, only using Jana Bastos, now, next, later, big, huge timeframes, for instance, so that you don't commit to specific goals or outcomes, possibly specific features and specific dates, months or years in advance, and then people expect you to deliver. That can be difficult then.
Okay, great.
I would like to maybe extend a little bit on the roadmap related questions, because roadmap typically are also quite useful for investment discussions, like in terms of budget or resources. Do you have any tips maybe as to how to make them more effective in those conversations? So what maybe to include, not to include, what to highlight?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's another great question. So, but yes, product roadmaps can be very useful to do some planning, some budgeting. And what I like to suggest, I'm certainly not the only and not the first person to suggest that, is to use modern goal-oriented or outcome-based roadmaps. So, I use goal-oriented and outcome-based interchangeably. Some people prefer one term or the other. Some people like to talk about problem-based roadmaps or themed roadmaps. Essentially, it's all the same idea. And the idea is that instead of identifying features, product capabilities, output, deliverables, and then mapping it onto a timeline and saying like in Q1 or in Q3, whatever. Just think, what quarter are we in? In Q3, we'll deliver those features. Then in Q4, we'll deliver these. And then in Q1 next year, we'll do those features. We say like, okay, what's a benefit that we want to offer in Q3? And what's another benefit or outcome that we want to achieve in Q4? What are the goals that we'd like to attain, that we'd like to meet? So that's the first thing. The second thing that I like to do for internal roadmaps is to state a date or a time frame. And I'd like to emphasize for internal roadmaps. It's not something that I would necessarily encourage for external public roadmaps, but for internal ones. Why? Well, because often you need to trade off goal achievement or goal attainment and on-time delivery. Of course, ideally, you'd like to meet all your dates and fully deliver the goals and do it on budget, but that's not always possible. And so, assuming you don't want to compromise quality, something's got to give. And there's only a limited amount of money available usually. And even if you can increase the budget, often you can't spend it in terms of hiring more qualified people with the right expertise and then quickly integrating them so that you really get that productivity boost straight away. It usually is difficult, right? So hence, often in software development, there's this trade-off between meeting a date or fully achieving a goal. And so dates or timeframes is something I like to add. I also like to add metrics in terms of success criteria to help me understand what does it take to meet a goal or achieve an outcome or provide a certain benefit. And then I do tend to include a few high-level coarse-grained features for each product goal on my roadmaps, but those features have to serve a goal. So the goal comes first, and then you ask yourself, okay, what are some key deliverables or pieces of outputs, some key outputs that are necessary in order to meet that goal? And you want to keep them really, really big and huge, way bigger than an Epic, or certainly way, way, way bigger than a user story. So, maybe just something like the ability to track my eating habits using a dashboard could be a feature for a goal on the product roadmap that says, help me understand my eating habits and acquire initial user base, for instance. So, I quite like to work with compound goals, a goal that addresses a user benefit or offers a user benefit and a business benefit at the same time. So those are some key elements. And then, the question is, how do we get to a budget? And I'd say, well, create a draft product roadmap and then ask yourself, okay, based on your experience, and sorry, that product roadmap should be based on a validated product strategy. So strategy comes first, and then you should test your strategy. You should validate it and ensure that the statements are likely to be correct, are likely to be valid. You do this, for instance, by carrying out some market research or maybe building some prototypes, depending on what kind of assumptions and risks you want to address. And then once you've got that, you're in a good position to derive an initial roadmap and think about the outcomes and goals you'd like to achieve. Think about dates or timeframes, and then ask yourself, okay, what does it take now in order to achieve those goals in those timeframes? How many people will we need, and what kind of skills will be required? What kind of roles? And do we have those people? Can we source those people? Can we hire those people? And if you have a development team that you can't change, then obviously talk to the development team members and say, like, look, does it seem that this roadmap is realistic? Does it seem feasible, actionable? And if not, how do we have to change it? And you may then have to iterate over your roadmap, and you may have to weaken your goals. Or you may have to increase some of the timeframes and adjust it accordingly until you end up with a product roadmap that is reasonable and feasible. Sorry, feasible, realistic and feasible. Yes, and then hopefully that'll then give you a good indication, a fairly solid initial indication of the likely cost. And then as you start executing the roadmap and working towards the first product goal, you can track the development progress using, say, a burn down chart or another tool. and see if the initial cost is appropriate in order to meet your goal, your outcome, achieve your outcome on time. And if that's not the case, obviously, you need to think about how you can, what adjustments you can make. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I would like maybe to zoom out a little bit from the topic of product vision and strategy, and just in the remaining time think about some of the trends that you have seen in product management in the last years. You have quite a lot of experience working with a bunch of people. Can you name some of those trends that you have observed?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So what trends have I seen? I mean, first of all, I think that's something we've probably all experienced. Product management has grown significantly. So there's been an influx of new product people, which I think is really nice, particularly driven by companies embracing digitalization and undergoing digital and agile transformations. Product management has grown. With the growth, it's also in a way become more diverse. And in a way, I think product management, certainly in the agile space and for digital products, has matured. But at the same time, because there's been such an influx, I still think that product management compared to other professions is comparatively young. And product management has also significantly changed. I mean, I first when I think back when I came first in touch with product management over 15 years ago, 20 years ago probably now, or even longer. Product management, I think was quite different from what it is today. And so, there have been agile practices and agile models that have influenced product management. Things like business model generation has influenced product management. Things like user-centered design has influenced product management. Design thinking has influenced product management. Those are all kind of new trends that emerged in the last 10, 15 years, and I think really have had a profound impact. You think about lean startup, for instance, work done by people like Eric Ries and Ash Moria, and things like the lean canvas, for instance. And I mentioned already business modeling, and the business model canvas, work by Alexander Osterwalder, for instance, and more recently around the value proposition canvas, for instance. So it's been quite a journey. I think it's been a positive journey. But as I said, it's product management still, the way I look at it, fairly immature compared to, say, software development or marketing or sales. And another trend would be that, I don't know if that's a trend or if it's, well, I guess it's a continuation of an existing trend, that we still don't have really any agreed learning path or education for product people. I mean, product people, I think most people still stumble upon product management or just being told to do it, or start practicing it, right, without having received any or very little formal training, and then you discover things as you go along. Very few university programs exist where people are actually being taught product management practices. Certainly as graduate courses, there are a few post-grad courses. It's quite a diverse profession still, I think. And things, again, we've struggled with in product management now for a while is a clear understanding of role and responsibilities, and also the authority and empowerment, right? I mean, and that goes back really decades, and I think still, we struggle with it today. One of the reasons why the product owner role is called product owner is to emphasize the level of empowerment product people require in an agile context. The product owner is literally meant to own the product. Unfortunately, that message, I think, has been lost. Empowerment is a big one, and sustainability, right? I mean, being a product professional means having a very diverse job and a very interesting job, but that can be extremely challenging, and it can be very hard to meet all the different demands and attend to all the different diverse tasks that we have. And so, making our job sustainable and staying healthy and taking care of our own mental health, I think, is still something that a lot of people find challenging. Right?
Yeah, I think you talked about empowerment, and what if you are in a new you are new to the product ownership or product leadership role, what all questions you can ask to make sure that you have enough empowerment, or you can actually make the change or own the product right way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, if I was offered a product position, or position as a product manager or product owner, I would ask, what does it entail? And I would ask, well, who makes the strategic decisions for the product? Who decides, on the beneficiaries, the users and customers, and if that group of people is still the right one? Who decides on the specific problem that should be solved? Who decides on the standout features and the business goals? Who creates the product roadmap? Who decides on the contents of the product roadmap? What role do the stakeholders play? What decisions do the stakeholders make? Because I've worked with product people who essentially had to do what the stakeholders told them. And for me, that's strictly speaking not being a product professional. It's being a personal assistant to the stakeholders. I mean, every good project manager would say, like, hold on a second. Where's the specification? Where's the requirement specification? Everything's been written down, right? You signed this off. If it's not in there, it's going to cost you, and we'll have to have a change request procedure that has to be put in formally, and we'll have to meet and talk about this. And some product people just have stakeholders who come, and stakeholders expect, here's my feature, and of course you're going to do it. You're going to do it straight away. Not interested in what that does to you or the product or the development team. You're just expected to execute, right? So ask who owns the strategy and who makes the strategic decisions, which role the stakeholders play. Ask who you report to. Ask if there's a head of product, and ask how you would interact with the head of product. Ask how you would interact with other product people. So I think those are things that would be important for me to really get clarity on what is my role, what is my authority, what is my responsibility, and what are my tasks the main tasks that I'm expected to do, and the artifacts that I'm responsible for. Who's responsible for the budget? Who's responsible, as I said, for the strategy and the roadmap? Who's responsible for the business model? Who's responsible for the backlog? So
I think these are really great questions. One can assess where they are in this whole role. And now, if we just get everything together, one more question that we have is, we talked about vision, we talked about strategy, we talked about goals, we talked about user goals, business goals, also roadmaps. How do you see putting it all together? So do you suggest a chronological order that one should follow, so that to make sure that you have a really great product that you are working on?
Yeah, it's another interesting question. So there's no one right way to do things, certainly not in product management, I find. And I think personally, I mean, that can be confusing, but I think ultimately it's a good thing, because it gives people choice, and it gives people then to choose the approach that they feel is right for their product. So the way I like to do it is I've developed a model over the years that I find useful, and I like to start with the vision, and I then like to create an initial product strategy, and I then like to validate, to test that strategy, and that's very much inspired by Lean Startup. And then from that, I like to derive a goal-oriented, outcome-based roadmap. And from that roadmap, I then like to derive a product backlog, and I like to use the next product goal on the roadmap, the next outcome, in order to scope and focus the product backlog. And what I then like to do is I like to collect the relevant data using the relevant KPIs to assess if the strategy is working, and measure the progress, the development progress. And then at least once a quarter, get together with the key stakeholders and development team members and assess if the roadmap and the strategy are still working. So that's the strategic inspect and adapt cycle I mentioned earlier, in addition to, say, fortnightly inspect and adapt cycles on product increments on the tactical level, with essentially the same people. And so, I would say that the vision really feeds or helps find the right user, customer, and business goals. And then the user, customer, and business goals, they help discover the right outcomes or product goals. And a product goal offers the context for identifying the right sprint goal. And then, if you struggle to meet your sprint goal and struggle to build and create meaningful product increments, then you may have to adjust your product goal, and that may mean you not only have to adjust your product backlog, but also possibly your product roadmap. And if your product roadmap changes significantly, you may have to adjust your product strategy, including the user and business goals. And if you can't find a valid, effective product strategy, then you may have to abandon or adjust your vision. So this is how those goals and how those artifacts hang together, excuse me, in the model that I've developed. So it's initially a top-down approach, but then it's very much a bottom up as well. So all these connections between the different goals and artifacts, they're essentially bidirectional. Top down, bottom up.
I think that summed up quite well as to how one should follow. So-called, if you are new to the product, these are buzzwords for you unless you are get into it and actually work on it. So it was really helpful for you to sum this together. And one last question I can ask from my side is when we build this, if we have done all things right, suppose you validate with your stakeholders, you validate with your team. And how do you have any experience, and how do you celebrate this success when you have a great vision, you have great strategy, your product is successful, but how do you keep that success feed into this process, that okay, if we do these things right, this is what the outcome is?
Well, hopefully, how should I put this? So for me, having a vision, an inspiring shared vision, and a validated product strategy, they're like preconditions or prerequisites for launching a product or releasing a new product version that is likely to be successful, but they're no guarantee. So, you may have done some validation work, and then you've built your product and you launch or you release a new version, and the market response is poor. That can happen, right? I mean, ultimately, it's then worthwhile to pause and reflect and see, what went wrong, what can you learn, how can you avoid the same thing from happening again in the future. But there's no, innovation, product management, and innovation are tricky. There's no guarantee that things are going to work out. So it's complex business. I think once you have a product out in the marketplace and the product is doing well, I mean, that's really, I think, when you probably want to have a little celebration and do whatever is most appropriate for people. Some people like to crack open champagne. Some people like to, have a meal together. Some people like to, I don't know, get the company to sponsor a little trip somewhere. I guess that depends on how important the product is, how much money it's making, and if it's making any money. But I think that's an important first milestone. And then, of course, a product becomes only truly successful once you've reached product market fit. And, certainly for a revenue generating product, you've entered the growth stage. I mean, that's really where you want to be as quickly as possible, and usually also for an extended period of time. So that's then maybe when you want to have the real celebration.
Great. So I'm just saying if there are any more questions. Evelina, Anya. Okay, so I think thanks a lot, Roman, for a lovely chat. I think there were a lot of great insights that we got today about product vision and product strategy, especially how to make work on it collaboratively, because that actually will make sure that it is understood by all people working on the product, and making sure that it is communicated well. So thanks a lot for your time and giving these insights to us. And to all our viewers, we will summarize this talk, and please follow ProductTank Heidelberg pages for further updates. We have a lot more exciting events coming up later part of this year. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again, and hope it was a little bit useful.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.